Great. Well, welcome. Okay, that's great. Um, yeah, thank you all for joining again. You know, I know it's a dreary day. The weather would have prevented me from coming out here. So you know, well, maybe not, but I nearly. So I appreciate it. I Wim. I'm an independent AI policy researcher. I work here at Trajectory, where we work on research related to AI safety and AI safety focused governance. And I'm going to talk today about the states of diffusion. Actually, I'll say just before I get to that. So, you know, we run these talks on Tuesdays, more focused on AI policy, and then we have talks about technical research on Thursdays. And we have one of these talks on Tuesdays once every week or two, typically. And so, if you like this, there may be more material with other people. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm gonna get started. So this talk is going to be about diffusion. It's going to be big picture. It might be a little bit hand wavy, but I'm going to try and convey what I see as the kind of the reasons why a certain part of the AI conversation, which I think often gets left out, is really important. If it's hard to understand what I'm saying, raise maybe 2 fingers or something. If you have a question about a clarification question, please feel free to ask. If you have a question about the substance or you feel you disagree with a framing, I would love to hear it, but I would also like to say that for the end of the presentation. Yeah, okay, great. That's about it for that. So what I want to talk about in particular is the diffusion of AI, which is to say, okay, we make the breakthrough, and then how do we adopt it, and how fast do we adopt it? In particular, I want to talk about how the rate at which AI gets adopted and integrated into the military in the U.S. and China, in practice, namely, is really important for how we should think about the kind of AI arms race dynamic that we see and that people talk about between the U.S. and China, and I think neglected. And not only will the rate at which that happens be really important, but the way that we think about how it will happen and what we think it will look like before it happens, like already right now and in previous years, matters a lot. Because if we're wrong, the things that we will do in anticipation of what we thought was true are at odds with what would be globally good for people and the direction that AI progress goes in. And I'll start with an example. Yes. In this case, I am. Yeah. In this case, I'm going to be talking about, and there are related questions about like the economy, about people using chatbots for businesses and so on. I'm specifically going to be talking about the military in this case. Yeah. And you know, an example here. So you know, in general, questions of diffusion have mattered a lot and do matter a lot, right? And I think there's this, there's often an instinct to focus on being the first to develop a technology, and then we kind of assume that everything falls from there. I think there's a general sense among many academics that no, like who actually adopts the technology matters and has mattered in a lot of cases. For determining the way, like the balance of power. And so, you know, example here, this is lifted directly from Michael Horowitz's excellent book. France was a leader in the mid to late 1800s in developing naval technology. You know, they developed all the ones you can kind of see here, right? They were ahead of the game on submarines. They saw that submarines were going to be the future, torpedoes were going to be the future, as opposed to big battleships. And even so, they did not benefit from these technologies basically at all. Their rivals, as kind of articulated in this hefty quote by the sometimes librarian of the Royal Institution, Herbert C. Fife. You know, I could read part of this. You know, they've kind of basically the French engineers invented all this stuff. They did a great job of it. They saw it all coming decades before it happened. And the Brits pretended, and their rivals pretended to not care, pretended that it wasn't going to be, that, that they didn't think it was important. And then very, very meticulously copied and adopted and refined these major breakthroughs made by the French, and then used them against them and crushed them. And so, you kind of have this case where the French led on R&D, they led on research and development, and it was ultimately to their detriment, right? As you kind of see in this quote, right? We have been only the humble artisans working for them to their rivals to establish their superiority. Okay, so I'm now going to kind of make a big jump to this very specific kind of story that we see in the AI policy discourse. Have people read anything by the Forethought Institute or the essay Situational Awareness, which came out like a year ago, or Machines of Loving Grace? Have people heard of these essays? Can I see a hand? A hand? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So these were essays that come out. They're each by people who worked at or ran or have been kind of in the periphery of AI companies in the States, they've kind of set the tone in a lot of cases for how people think about how AI progress will go and what the next decade or two will look like. And I think these can be thought of as kind of the intellectual backing to an intuition that seems to be very pervasive in policy circles for American policymakers, which is that we need to beat China, right? We need to beat China on AI, and the way we beat China on AI is by leading on R&D, right? We have this lead on R&D. We need to keep this lead, right? We just saw, okay, leading on R&D doesn't mean that you naturally get this strategic advantage, but there is a case in this story for why actually AI isn't like other technologies, why it isn't like warships and so on. I'm not, and this is like there's a lot to these essays, and I would recommend that people go out and read them. I'm going to talk about a story that I think that there's a lot of overlap. They don't all touch on all of the kind of assumptions and points that I'll kind of draw out here, but yeah, with those caveats, you have this story where the first thing that matters is, and what people are working towards right now, is developing transformative AI, right? People talk about AGI, people talk about powerful AI. This is kind of like PhD level engineers that can do very long tasks and that are able to basically automate AI research. And typically the idea is like once you can automate AI research, you'll get something that looks like, or people call it a software singularity, a software intelligence explosion, where you have AI researchers doing AI research to make the AI researchers better, and then that makes those AI researchers better, and you kind of get more and better AI researchers, and it's like this positive feedback loop. That snowballs and snowballs, such that once you're able to automate AI research, you very quickly get this kind of explosive growth in AI capabilities. And there's a sense that once you get that, right, you can kind of expand to a bunch of other domains, right? You can do, we could just have this kind of this century in a decade, right? If you think of the kind of level of technology we were at in 1900 to 2000, you could have that kind of jump very quickly, because you have all these AI researchers, like right for every problem that we have, maybe 10 researchers working on right now, or 5 or 20 researchers. You have like 1,000 researchers. Maybe they're human level researchers, maybe they're beyond human level researchers, all working on these various problems, and you could just get this like really unbelievable acceleration of general R&D, and then this we kind of imagine this would lead to this, what people call a decisive strategic advantage, right? And you don't have to think about it in terms of, you can imagine less than a decisive strategic advantage, and this is thought of often as a kind of military advantage that would allow one country to defeat any rival, or like all the rivals together, and there's this quote here that kind of talks about what that would look like. some ideas to make this more vivid that people have proposed. So if you're able to have a bunch of researchers working on um, stuff related to biology, we can get lots of new kinds of bioweapons, right? Maybe bioweapons that can only target certain kinds of people that can spread very very quickly and are very very deadly. We could get so right now we're able to make drones that are about the size of a bumblebee. We could maybe get drones that are much much smaller than that, such that you could have one drone for every person on the planet, and they could all fit in like an aircraft carrier. Right, that'd be very hard to tell if someone's developing that. You could get manufacturing that happens at scales much much smaller than we have today. So you could like really really accurately recreate certain or just create certain structures and get bacteria that we are just not able to fight off. You could get if this R&D were to lead to an industrial explosion, you could see massive increases in our nuclear arsenals, right? Things like this. And I think this is really like obviously like really terrifying. And what's kind of driving this in the background is this security dilemma, right? Where the U.S. can't be sure that China won't do this, and so maybe they need to do it as a way to kind of defend themselves in case they do. And then China also does this, but it's very, very hard to tell. Are they planning to attack us, or are they planning? Are they afraid that we're going to attack them, right? And so both countries kind of have to escalate because if they don't, the other will, right? There's also a concern that this could destabilize the nuclear deterrent, right? So if we're able to either have new kinds of technologies that are like nuclear weapons in their destructiveness like this, or we're able to kind of like have very, very advanced missile detection and nuclear mitigation systems, we could maybe get rid of we could make it so that it would be harder for one country to strike, right? And if that seems possible or plausible, then both countries are incentivized to kind of work towards that, because if they don't, the other will. Okay. So this is the kind of this is I think a story that is kind of been in the water for the last year and beyond. And what does this mean? It means a couple things, right? So one thing that we kind of noticed with the story is that once you get to a point where like we're able to automate AI research, maybe even a bit before that, you kind of get this ball that starts rolling very, very quickly, right? And so it's important to get there before China does, right? For the U.S. And like importantly, right, because you see this kind of dramatic acceleration in technological progress, we probably won't see like a kind of very very steep exponential curve for adoption, right? That's not really how adopting things works, and so you want to be the first one, the first country to kind of be able to capitalize on that explosion, and maybe there's kind of in some cases a kind of softer implication of like, once you get there, right, and you're able to just stop the other country from getting there first, you're some bottlenecks aside, you're kind of set. You've maybe not entirely won, but mostly won, or gotten much of the way there. And even leading by a small amount, right? Like if we're imagining like a century and a decade's worth of progress, then if I'm leading by a year or 6 months, then that's equivalent to maybe 10 years of progress, right? And if it's exponential or like super exponential, the country who's behind won't be able to catch up. And so what you need to do is accelerate AI R&D as much as possible. And how much we adopt right now doesn't really matter, because we'll hit to this software singularity point, and then everything will kind of flow from there. That's a little bit rough, but and not all the essays are kind of implying this, but there's that sense. Okay, now there are some assumptions that are made in the story. And people talk about why they think that these are likely. There are good defenses for them, and these are open questions, right? And there's several talks worth of information to cover behind all of them to talk about whether we think they're plausible. I'm mostly not going to talk about why these are plausible. I will say though that I think that both sides in both sides of these have kind of strong arguments in favor. And if something seems implausible to folks, we should go over that. I'd be happy to go over that more. Um, um, so the first assumption is that uh, what happens is that R&D gets automated before everything else, right? So we can imagine alternatively that there are lots of things that kind of naturally get automated first, right? Things about in the military context, things related to communication, things related to the kind of tasks people would need to do their business, right? To do organizational things, logistics. We assume that R&D gets automated before everything, all those things. We also assume that I think often there's this assumption that the way that this kind of transformative AI interacts with the military looks a lot more like nuclear weapons than electricity, say, in this sense. You don't necessarily need, like, sometimes it'll just happen, right? In many of these pictures, and plausibly it will just happen. But maybe we don't need to like upgrade and like have AI be in every part of the military, right? Like if we can get this like super weapon, like nuclear, right? Like if we think of nuclear weapons, once we got once we did the R&D, it was very easy to kind of deploy the weapon. Like we didn't need to, as opposed to electricity, for instance, right? Like whoever developed electricity, you don't automatically get like military superiority for free once you have nuclear weapons. Sorry, once you have electricity. You need to like electrify all of your stuff. You need to, and this is true like combustion engines as well, right? This is true if people talk about this is like a general purpose technology, bringing about a general military transformation, right? Where kind of every part of the military gets upgraded, and then nuclear weapons on the other hand are this kind of very discreet, right? Like the rest of the military maybe mostly stays the same, but you have this one weapon and that's your like your trump card, right? So there's sometimes this assumption that you would just have this trump card, right? And that's what matters. So you get, and then there are all these bottlenecks that people kind of are concerned about and think would reduce the rate of AI progress. Things about like we don't have enough computing power. We maybe need to do a bunch of experiments in order to be able to do R&D, and those will all take a long time. And maybe there's something where you need several parts of there's humans and there are AIs involved in the process. So like the O-ring principle, and there's kind of if one you kind of need all of them. It's like the weakest link will kind of set the rate at which progress happens, right? And until you have everything automated, you don't really get progress. Or even if you're able to automate some parts of a progress of a process, one part of it quickly becomes the bottleneck. Okay, but we say these things won't all fully hold us back from getting this ball rolling, and also we're going to have robust. We're not going to be. All of the progress that we make won't automatically be leaked to China or vice versa, right? I think there's another world where this is wrong, right? I think there's a world where these things just don't pan out this way. And okay, and this world is a lot murkier. I think there's been a lot less to kind of sketch out what this would look like. We don't have microsite hosted essays about what the world looks like in 30 years if AI isn't like transformative in this way. But this maybe looks more like we have more what people felt after the GPT-5 release, right? We don't get transformative AI in the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, say. Research and development doesn't get automated first, right? This sense of like, okay, we just automate science, then everything falls from that. There's some folks who have looked into this and they think that it's doing science involves a lot of things that AIs are not good at, and a lot of like physical work, and just tasks that we have not optimized for it yet. And so plausibly it'll just take a long time to automate that, and we'll see lots of applications of AI in the economy, and various industries there, and then also in the military, before we see these kind of major breakthroughs in technology. There's another part of this, which is that maybe we just can't lock down the information here. Like if we make a breakthrough, it really is only a matter of time and only a very small period of time, maybe, right, months, um, even before our adversary gets that information. And if you kind of take all of these together, you start to get a very different picture, right? If the reason why it mattered so much that you get R&D first before your adversary is that technological progress was kind of on this exponential or super exponential trajectory. If it's no longer on that trajectory, then that doesn't matter as much, right? And what's more, if your adversary has more time to get the information that is underpinning the breakthroughs that you've made, because progress is slower, and because we're not able to kind of lock down this information, then things start to look different. Yeah, and I think one way of summarizing this is that it's less Manhattan Project and more kind of more electricity, more steam engine. Manhattan Project, we see like that ultimately people tried, they did espionage, they were somewhat successful, but the people who were developing the technology still got the technology, still won, right, as a result of it. They were able to translate it very easily into a strategic advantage. And yeah, maybe that's just not how it goes, right? Maybe diffusion between countries happens faster than diffusion within a country, right? In other words, if one country is a faster adopter than the other, right? If the U.S. integrates the technology into their military faster than China does, even if China developed it first, it could still be the case that the U.S. wins, so to speak, right? Or has a kind of AI-driven strategic advantage before China does. And in this case, in general, adoption just matters less, right? Like in the kind of in the original naval case. It's not that AI capabilities don't matter at all, but it matters less. And maybe so yeah, if we can visualize this, we're not seeing like yes. Oh, sorry, yeah, general military transformation. Yes, yeah, and so this is like the electrification of the military, right? The use of steam engines in everything, as opposed to a very narrow, discrete thing like a nuclear weapon, where you get the capability, you get the advantage without having to do a general upgrade. And yeah, we can imagine this as, and by the way, like this is very like people. I don't think there is much. There isn't very good mapping of what the way that the different ways that the integration of AI into the military could look like. We don't really know yet, but I think some things the starting point is, very fast communication, very decisions that happen faster, that are better informed. A lot of the kind of organizational stuff happening much smoother. Of course, it's not that it kind of be a 0 and then 1, right? But we have the kind of military technology progresses as if like AI wasn't happening, then all of a sudden we get it all at once. But it's this much more gradual kind of integration. Okay, why is this important? I think this is important because in this second world, there is more room for U.S.-China coordination on developing AI, right? Here at Trajectory, folks are worried about lots of different kinds of risks, but a lot of those risks kind of happen in spaces or happen as a result of developing AI hastily because we feel the need to, because of kind of competitive pressures, right? Of course, these can happen within a country, but then those kind of within it, those dynamics are reinforced by the international thing, right? And in principle, if it's possible to beat China or beat the U.S. without being the first to develop the technology, or without leading on developing more capable AIs, then the nature of the risks change, and there is in principle more of a possibility to have certain kinds of coordination. Um, what's more, the way that we talk about the like the way that we talk about this matters, right? And the right now, um, this is not something people believe, right? And people need to believe it. Like, it can't just be true. It needs to be seen to be true. If people just think that it would happen, if people don't think that it would happen, then they will proceed as if R&D is all that matters. And so you'll have the risks from hasty deployment will be more elevated than they would otherwise be. And right now, I claim that there is like very, very, very little thinking on this. There are very few people trying to figure out whether this is true. Like a literal handful. And I think this is like really incredibly important for this specific reason. Okay, how does the nature of the risks change? I think it goes like you see fewer risks happening while the AI is being trained. So plausibly, right, we could have something like a CERN for AI. You could have a kind of a joint lab between various countries, maybe even between the US and China. And in that situation, frontier AI would be deployed in a space where it's much more deliberate. They would take their time, and so you wouldn't kind of have the AI kind of go rogue, say, during training or while it's kind of waiting in the wings, waiting to be deployed. However, there would be a lot more surface area for things to go wrong in deployment, right? If the AI is being kind of integrated into all aspects of the military, as opposed to just being one trump card, there's just more space for things to go wrong. And if the race is in deploying things, then the competitive pressures are shifted from one spot to another. So that's the general thrust of my claim, right? Like, and I've kind of put that out there. There's like a ton of things that I haven't elaborated on there, and we should talk about them. But I want to just put forward that I think this is really important, and no one's working on it, figuratively, and so that's that. Some reasons why you might not think this is important. We can imagine that in a situation where people are developing, are trying to like translate the AI research into a strategic advantage, right? Like they're all trying to get nuclear weapons, and it's not working. They would still be trying very hard insofar as AI research is less, as trying to develop a super weapon takes less time and expectation than integrating AI into your entire military. So yeah, even if it's not working, they would probably be trying very hard, and maybe you could just make it happen anyways, by just overcoming these bottlenecks that would naturally make it such that automation happens before the weapon gets deployed. Alternatively, I think a lot of kinds of ideas about international coordination just won't happen in practice. I think it's really, really hard to do this. We failed miserably with less difficult problems, with lower stakes. Maybe there's something like we would need the US and China to give more resources to this joint lab than either of them have individually, such that it would be it would be guaranteed to kind of pull ahead on frontier stuff, and they just wouldn't do that. And they so wouldn't do that. It's not even close, right? And I think that's unfortunately quite plausible, even likely, even very likely. But there are maybe other kinds of international coordination, even so, that could be plausible here, right? I think you'd have to go ahead and say that the people thinking that the rate of adoption matters at least as much as leading on R&D you would have to think that wouldn't allow for weaker forms of coordination, in order for this not to matter tremendously. And so we need a clearer picture here. That's the first part of the talk. I expect at this point, I'm coming into this, I'm thinking, hopefully people will kind of have read all these essays, which was maybe an unrealistic assumption. And so I think it would be cool if folks kind of asked even pointed questions from people who work here, um, questions to kind of clarify what these two worlds look like. Yes, thank you. Yes. Totally. That's a great question. And I think that in practice right now, that's what's kind of yeah, that's especially important, like in the world that we're currently living in. The way that I think that the way that I think about this is that um, um, even if you solve the market pressure problem, or you can't solve the market pressure problem because you can't solve the international coordination problem. Something like AI is leading on the U.S. is leading on AI R&D right now. They're they're like the current government is trying very hard or to stop regulation and of any of to stop regulation, um, and the kind of reasons and the defense that is given for that, and I think generally taken as legitimate, is that if we don't do it, China will. And so even before you can get to the point where, so I think that like the market pressure thing in the current world is kind of the main and the proximate um, um, driver of this kind of the risk that comes from hasty development. I think that the ultimate driver, or the thing that is at least necessary, if not sufficient, to solve before you can solve the problem of competition within a country, is the international coordination problem. But yes, I see this is very important. I think, but there are some scenarios, right? Like one of these essays, at least, paints this picture where the AI companies get nationalized, and the projects get nationalized. So you have this kind of Manhattan Project um, um, idea, and so in that world, you don't have these competitive pressures, and that happens when AI really starts kicking off. Possibly that won't happen, but yeah, that is how I actually think about that. Yes, yes, and then yes. That's fantastic. I would almost want to. I wish I'd given you the mic before you said all that, because we are streaming for context, and so unfortunately people need to hear that. But that was great. I will. Yeah. Okay. Um, to respond to that. So there were kind of two things there. The first one was, um, um, if we were in this first scenario, once it became clear that that the U.S. was taking all this AI stuff very seriously, China would have responded in kind, tried to like do this national project, um, tried to steal the model weights, and it didn't do that. Um, and so that's not where their head is at. It's not what they're, and then they're focused on um, kind of commercial adoption more than military adoption right now. And so yeah, and is that a fair and that's why we should expect to be in the second world more than the first world.
Like a mini litmus test of what how China would respond in crunch time. When we're much closer to AGI, much closer to militarily useful and transformative AI, and it didn't act in the way that a lot of people who are concerned about that thought it would. So yeah, that's
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So what? Yeah. What are my thoughts on this? Yeah. Right. No, that's great. I mean, and the kind of so the hope here is that I think all of these assumptions are generally unchallenged or they're not challenged nearly enough. And so like I may well be inclined um, to agree with this. And I also think that World Two is at least likelier than people think that it is in general relative to World One, if not likelier altogether than World One. Um, um, some maybe thoughts on this are that it seems I think at least many people who work in the space think that China stole the weights or tried and succeeded in stealing the weights for GPT-4. They just won't like tell us. Um, um, and yeah, maybe there's also something about how the stakes in absolute terms just really matter a lot. Where because we're not close right now to developing AGI or transformative AI, the stakes will be people expect to increase dramatically as we get closer, and the level of investment required to increase dramatically as we get closer. Um, it's just uh, like maybe the fact that they didn't respond very much wasn't wasn't that indicative, because yeah, or like maybe something that, here is like how do you think like yeah I can kind of see something where that China responded the way that it did because yeah, just isn't that concerned that I'd be curious to know, and maybe this is a side conversation, but how you think China would have responded if it like to this specific situation, if it were to become like to come to believe that this was a number one priority down the line. Like if China comes to actually take this on and take on like a massive kind of like highest possible stakes, it has this kind of wake up moment. What would have been the indicators for that before we get there in 2022? That would be I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I think so. Yes, yes, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, yes, totally. Yes. Um, 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 I feel like a kind of useful excuse to limit the U.S. consumer rights, right? Like we kind of know that China is actually surprisingly, for many, open to international coordination efforts, and uh, so this narrative that the kind of very cutthroat approach beat the U.S. at their own game in terms of their approach. It's just and so and the point here being that if we were to say that actually, or if people came to be the case that, or we realize that it's true that adoption is the most important thing, they would just stay worse because they're not and just want to live in harm.
Yeah, I also think like their push for open source AI is very indicative of them going through the diffusion angle. I read you mentioned that for World 2 there are not a lot of literature. Some of us might have some China folks might have heard of the book. Jeff Dang wrote a book. George Washington professor, assistant professor there. He wrote a book on diffusion and explaining AI as general purpose technology and why, in that case, maybe China has a little bit of a disadvantage because it still needs to build the infrastructure out to get there. But I think, as a China scholar, I think, yeah, based on what I read, what China said, what it's done, it thinks that diffusion, kind of like the general purpose technology diffusion, it's much more. It's like the winning strategy. But yeah.
That's fascinating. Actually, one of the things that kind of was I think that was a lot of information was actually why I started talking about like what he thought the vision of general knowledge integration of AI was, and the kind of vision of like this is filling a massive gap in the literature, and also like we have kind of no idea what the data is. We only have a very rough sense of it. But yes, it's an excellent book. Recommended. Yes.
Curious, it's
Oh, I'm sorry, perfectly. If you're online, you don't get any questions. I'm sorry. It's only in person now. Thank you for coming. Okay, great. Yeah.
you wanna distribute?
Yes, that would be great. Would you mind to thank you? Yes. Thank you all for coming here. This is it. If you have questions on each other, that's great.